quicker than probably usual, knowing that there's always problems. Dealing with 13 other people and the egos involved, you can understand what goes on. At any rate, quite excited about the book. It offers a lot of detail in terms of how people made decisions in history. And many of these decisions were made with the use of mind-altering substances, and this has sort of been left out of the equation.
So what exactly were your motivations for writing the book then?
Well, again, I think it's the detail. For some time now, I have expressed the opinion that the academic community, out of political correctness, certainly leaves out a lot of things. And these things tend to be either sexual or having to do with mind-altering substances. There's a lot of information out there, certainly, but it's stuck away in dusty journals in libraries here and there, and most people don't get access to it. So the question is really who makes the decision as to what they teach in colleges and universities, and why have they not brought out this issue of mind-altering substances, because it's very, very important. We can trace the use of these substances back to the Upper Paleolithic, going back probably 30,000 years, and they probably go back much further than that. And these were used to make decisions in times of crisis or everyday problems in living.
All right. So maybe you can go over some of the main points or issues that the book deals with, and focus on some of the definitions of key words, maybe, because I assume you're going to be throwing out maybe a lot of information or words that we haven't heard. So maybe if you could pick out a few of them and talk about those.
Okay. Well, we have the word entheogenic, which is actually a combination of three terms. En, which refers to inside. Theo, which is actually Dio, is God, and then we have the last term, gen, which represents Genesis. And so what we're looking at here is generating the divine within. Now, when you're using substances in a ritual context, commune with the other side, then we call them entheogens. If you're just using them recreationally, we call them shrooms or whatever, pot, whatever we want to call them. One of the problems here is that much of the ritual use of these substances has been lost. And that loss has occurred because of the restriction of these substances to special people. For example, in Exodus in the Bible, we read about the anointing oils. And Chris Bennett and Neil McQueen have brought to our attention the use of cannabis within these oils. And these oils were restricted to the Aaron priesthood, which is probably one of the first drug laws that we can identify. And so with this restriction, they demonized the substances as well, because they did not want them used in a secular sense. They wanted to use them only in a ritual sense. So they became demonized over time. And the other problem that we bump into, particularly in Mexico, is people going to the little villages down there, finding out about the substances, if you will, and using these things recreationally. And so a lot of these substances have been stripped away from their ritual context. And when you start doing that, the average person forgets this. After a couple of generations, we tend to forget how we made decisions. And this is essentially what we're in today. So these substances have been neglected. They're still used. But they're neglected, and they're very, very important.
So I think one of the things that your book deals with is the evolution of culture. Is that right?
Yes. And how decisions were made as we progressed. How did we get to this place in history? And again, these substances were very, very important. Now, there are a number of ways to commune with the other side. We can get sick, we can have illness, fever, meditation, dance, all kinds of methods to get to the other side. But a system that would be, shall we say, a definite way to get to the other side, an instant way, would be the use of these substances. Now, we can go back. Now, chapter 2 in this book is very, very, very interesting. Michael Winkelmann has looked at these, he's a psychologist, he's looked at these things in terms of brain physiology and made comparisons between, say, the livers of a chimpanzee and other apes and certainly the monkeys. And what we find is that chimpanzees do not have the enzymes really in their livers to deal with a lot of these substances, yet we do. And so his proposal is that we have been using these substances mainly perhaps for 4 or 5 million years, for whatever reason we were using them. But at any rate, chimpanzees don't get into this. They'll drink alcohol, they'll take heroin and so on, but they do not like LSD or DMT, some of these other substances. And probably the reason for this is that the images they see, they can't express. And so they get very upset about it, and they don't like to return to these. Now, humans, on the other hand, we're the only creature on the planet, I believe, that enjoys frightening itself and going back for more. And so when we take these substances, we can express our experience with them and talk about them and so on. A chimpanzee can't. But the fact that we can't have these enzymes in our livers to be able to deal with these substances suggests a long, long season of use with these substances.
Okay, the first picture that you showed us from the cover of your book, is that the Tree of Life?
Yes, it is.
Can you talk about the Tree of Life and how that relates to entheogens and how entheogens affected art and things like that?
Yes, the Tree of Life, it depends on I guess the system that you grow up in. For example, if you grow up as a Catholic or Christian, you are to read the Tree of Life, which would be the Tree of Jesse, which is really to be read as a genealogical history. In other words, we start with David and we work up the line, and at the top we bump into Jesus. And so you're to look at this as sort of a genealogy in terms of passing the baton on. And so for Jesus, we pass it on to Peter and then the rest of the popes. However, that's not what the Tree of Life is. The Tree of Life is an expression of the evolution of consciousness. And certainly if you read the Kabbalah, you definitely get that out of the Jewish tradition. But what seems to be evolving here is not our physical selves, but our spiritual selves, which really is knowledge and understanding. Let me show you a picture here, a rather interesting one, if I can find it real quick. Oftentimes, what we bump into in Christian art is the rose window. I'm not sure how well you can see this. But this comes from Angers Cathedral in France, and I don't know if you can see this, but this is the rose window, and the rose window really is a representation of the female vagina. And here we see Jesus. I don't know if you can see this very well, but he's emerging from a mushroom. Now, if you didn't know what to look for, you'd never see this, but there he is, and he's emerging from a mushroom. You can see the mushroom cap and the annulus that goes with it. Can you see that at all?
Yeah, well, we can see it, but it's a bit far away. So even I've got the there you go. Even I've got that's a little bit better. I mean, is Jesus in the oval shape in the center?
Yeah, he's in the oval shape, which that oval shape is actually a representation of a mushroom. Now, again, if you did not know what to look for in the art, and if you're looking at the Christian art as a history lesson, then you'd never see these things. But these mushrooms are all over the art, and if you don't believe me, just get a hold of my book, The Mushroom and Christian Art, and there's a DVD in the back with 252 images. And I've got a couple thousand more images, and I have people send me images every week. I get a couple of images. Some of them are duplicates, but always seeing new stuff. And what it is the mushroom is the signature of God, because the art was inspired by God, and very little of the Christian art is ever signed by the artists, and the signing of the art really wouldn't occur until the early 20th century. Prior to that, You had special people who were devout individuals who would perhaps use some of these substances, and then progress with the art. All the art and all the Christian art was commissioned, and the artists were told what to put into the art. And we see mushrooms very, very clearly at some points in history. Other times we see the art. The art is sort of how shall we say disguised in one way or another. Here is I don't know if you can see this very well, but this comes from a mosaic that's in St. John's Basilica in Rome.
You got to hold it up. Hold it up a little bit more.
Can you see that?
Yep. See the mushroom there.
Yeah, right here. This is actually a mosaic that's in the ceiling that is over a baptismal font, which you step into, and it fills up with water to about your knees, and then you pour water over your head. And if you look up into the ceiling, you see this image over here, which has 8 sides to it, and there's a mushroom in each, and there's different birds that go with each mushroom, and so on. This is really an expression coming out of ancient Egypt. I don't want to get into it. Take me some time to bring all that together, but the point is that early on, and that basilica dates back to probably the 5th century of the current era, even before that. What's being said here is that Jesus is the mushroom, essentially. The deity is the mushroom. And you can see this very clearly in the art once you know what to look for. And again, if you're not tuned into what to look for, you'll never see the mushrooms. Many of them are disguised in scarves, in the clothing. Sometimes you see the art, the mushrooms down by people's feet. You always look for things that are kind of out of place, the wrong color, this type of thing.
So you've probably, I know from our last conversation that you had some local Catholic bishops, or not bishops, but the local clergy come to you with some complaints. What do you say to them when they, I mean, how do you dig into their rational minds to be able to see it?
Well, it's difficult to convince people of this. Even sometimes when you show them the images, they'll deny it. And the reason for this is that they want to read Christianity as a history lesson. It's not. If we go back 2,000 years to Palestine, what we bump into are a bunch of cults, these small groups. They had various names: Jesus cults, Christ cults. There were cults that were headed by Egyptian priests who had left the fold in Egypt because of Christianity coming in there, and starting their own little groups. And out of this, a number of groups finally coalesced, and we end up with what's called Christianity. But basically, Christianity had 3 ideas connected to it. Know thyself, seek knowledge, and be a decent person. That's really all that was said. And then, of course, it gets perverted into a political system called Catholicism later on. Now, the priests don't like me saying things like this, as you suggested. I don't argue with them, because it's the old statement: when you argue with a fool, you become one yourself. And so I let them have their beliefs and their practices. I have great difficulty, however, believing that the priests really believe that they wave hands over things and make things magical. Do these priests really believe all this stuff today in the face of modern science? Hard to know if they really do. Now, a lot of priests, however, have come around to the realization that, yeah, the mushrooms are in the art. And one priest mentioned, well, I know that they're there, but I don't know why they're there. And so they won't take the next step to realize that this is the signature of God. This is the method of communing with God.
So I know you mentioned Egyptian, but you said you didn't really want to get into it that much. But could you talk about the pre-Hebrew or even early Hebrew, the polytheistic religions of that area, and how they dealt with entheogens?
Okay, sure. What we have today as Judaism Much of it comes out of Egypt. Much of the, shall we say, the use of substances, if you will, really comes out of Egypt. Many of the other stories, say in Genesis, which was written last, by the way, the chapter of Genesis was written last, probably sometime in the 4th century, late 5th century of BC, to tie all the other chapters together. Initially, the Hebrew were polytheistic. They were a Canaanite tribe. They broke away because they were losing their identity as they were coming into these little city-states, if you will. And so they formulated a lot of rules to separate themselves from the Canaanites. Up until about 586 BC, they were polytheistic. And during that time, they were banished, if you will, or exiled to Babylon. This is one of the first exit stories, really. The Akkadians come in. The Hebrew get beat up once more. You hear all these battles in the Bible and how they're winning all this. The Hebrews didn't win very many battles because they couldn't form allies. They thought they were better than everyone else. And so they kept getting beat up. In 586, they were exiled to Babylon. They were there for about 26 years. Cyrus the Great comes in from Persia and tells them to go home, so they do. And many of the stories they encountered there, the flood story and so on and so forth, that ends up in the Old Testament. Now, sometime after 560, and you can read this in 1 Samuel, they give up their Baals and Ashtoreths, and they worship the Lord only. So it's only in the 5th century or late 6th century, 5th century of BC that we start to see monotheism. Now, in terms of substances, the ancient Egyptians had all kinds of substances, and of course the Egyptologists don't want to talk about this. They're pretty close-lipped, but it's starting to come out now, and I have quite a bit of information in the Mushroom and Christian Art book on this. One of the things that they had, again, were these anointing oils. So let's look at some words. In ancient Egypt, we have a word called Mishi. I'm not sure how it's pronounced because they didn't use vowels, but Mishi, we could spell it M-E-E-S-H-E-E, and Mishi is a reference to crocodile fat. When the Pharaoh was crowned Pharaoh, during that ceremony, they would pour this crocodile fat over his head. Now, this fat was laced with substances. It could have been cannabis. It could have been henbane, which is in Egyptian henbane is very, very powerful, and the drug there is scopolamine. And so, if it was henbane, this priest would have, or the pharaoh would have been in God's house real quick. At any rate, these anointing oils called Mishi. This comes into the Hebrew tradition with the word Messiah, which means the anointed one, and then this comes into Christianity through the Greek, or the word Christ. So Christ, Messiah, and Mishi all represent the same thing, and that is the anointing oils. And that's only one of the substances that was used. There are many references in the Jewish literature, the Zohar, for example, to Anemona muscaria, the sacred mushroom, which is also referenced in Christianity. So it's not just one substance. There's many of them. There's henbane, there's cannabis, there's Anemona muscaria, there's psilocybin, and so on and so forth. Many, many substances that are referenced. But again, the reference to these substances are hidden. They're hidden within the poetry, certainly composed by the priests. But through analysis, if you read Chris Bennett's work or read Carl Ruck's work, you can connect with the words that are used and how they translate into these substances. So ancient Egypt is a place of interest here. A lot of research has been done. Some of the earlier research done by Budge and others is probably a little more accurate because when they referenced these substances, they gave names to them that we would understand, and a more recent translation somewhat left these things out. So that's a little bit about ancient Egypt.
Well, while we're in ancient Egypt, I'm curious if you've done much research on at some point, the the pharaohs moved their home to Amarna, and when they moved to Amarna, they changed it. Let's see, it became a monotheism. Is that right, or it changed back to a polytheism? I can't remember. Can you explain how that worked and who was involved?
Yeah, the idea of monotheism has been around for a long, long time. The ancient Egyptians had this right from the beginning. There's a word called, Neteru. The word Neteru, and again, I don't know how to pronounce, but it can mean God as a singular. But when you speak of God as a singular, you really can't say much because it's sort of like a singularity. It's everything and nothing at the same time. And the ancient Egyptians had need, psychological need, if you will, to discuss and talk about the forces of nature, and that's what these gods are all about. So Neteru could also refer to the gods. Now, let's talk about Amarna, El Amarna. In and around 1352 BCE, we have a pharaoh by the name of Akhenaten. His father was Amenhotep III, who is probably Solomon in the Bible. I won't get into all that. We'll talk about Akhenaten. Akhenaten is Moses in the Bible, and I'll argue with any scholar on this. Freud even came very close to coming up with this many, many years ago in his book Moses Monotheism. But Akhenaten, through the influence of his father, Amenhotep III, closed all the temples in Egypt and told everybody that all they could worship was the Aten sun disk. Aten, when we translate that into Hebrew, becomes Adon, which is another word for the deity. The Aten sun disk is the mushroom, if you will. He moved, once he closed the temple, and closed down the Amun-Ra priesthood, he was in fear of his life. The priests were very powerful. They had a lot of money. They had a lot of land. And his life was in danger. And so he moved up the Nile, going toward the Delta region, about 200 miles up the river from Thebes. And he built this temple complex, living complex, and burial complex on the east side of the river, which was really, really different. Most of the burials in ancient Egypt are on the west side. Someone who's dead was called a Westerner. At any rate, he built this new site, and then he disappeared. He's around for about 18 years, and then he disappears. Now, I have a story in the Failed God book, which came out in 2008, where I discuss probably what happened to him. But he was worshiping the sun, undoubtedly using the mushroom, and that whole site is very, very different from anything else that the Egyptians had experienced. Now, what he did, really, he's a heretic pharaoh. He pretty much destroyed the culture by going toward monotheism, because monotheism excludes people. Polytheism lets anybody, and you can worship anything you want. But monotheism, you're either in it or out of it. And if you're in it, fine. If you're out of it, you've got a mark on your back, because there can only be one celestial truth. With polytheism, and there can be any number of celestial truths, because it's up to the individual. So we end up with a type of monotheism which comes into the Hebrew tradition. That's where we get the monotheism in the Hebrew tradition. It comes out of ancient Egypt. The Exodus story, if you will, we can trace that back to Sargon the Great. The story of Sargon the Great and how he ruled Mesopotamia is the story up in Exodus, but it has nothing to do with Moses. It's a story that they borrowed when they were in exile in Babylon. The other part of the story is Akhenaten. When he was real small, they were in fear of his life, because Amenhotep III, who is Solomon in the Bible, had a problem. He had two great wives, Cinnamon, who's probably his sister, and another lady by the name of Tai, who was probably part Hebrew. It would take me to get into that story, but anyway, he has two great wives. know what to do here. He's the one that's torn in half. If you recall the story of the problem with the two ladies with the child, and they come to Solomon and they want him to solve the problem. At any rate, he's the one that's torn in half because he has two wives, and Cinnamon is killing Ty's children. There's two children that she had that sort of disappear, but they take Akhenaten. That's his name for himself. His name would have been Amenhotep IV, and they send him up the Nile with relatives in the Delta. That's the other part of the story of being in the Nile and the basket and all that business. So we can with confidence say that Akhenaten is Moses in the Bible, and it's a wonderful story, and it is where the Hebrew tradition comes from. Of course, they don't want to admit this, but it's really where it came from.
Okay, it's my fault. I think I pushed us too far into Egypt. I know you said you wanted to discuss that another time. I was just very curious about Amarna. But let me ask you one last question before I open it up and let everyone else ask you questions.
Okay.
Because your book deals with sort of the evolution of human culture, I'd like to hear a little bit more about how entheogens have affected the evolution of human culture.
Well, humans have to make decisions. And many times we don't know what to do. And one of the things that we recognize in prehistory is the idea of ancestor worship. Our friends die, our parents die, and we have difficulty dealing with that, and so we invent a story. And the story is that they're deceased, but they're living in another place, and they can be contacted, they can be on call. And so we see this going to the other side, the shamans, if you will, going to the other side to get information from the ancestors, or to tell the ancestors to tell the animals to come back for another meal. Of course, the animals are the meal, but we'll revere them if they come back. And so decision making, many times, these ancestors of ours found themselves in a bad spot where they didn't know what to do. And so they would take substances, go to the other side, commune with the ancestors, and come back with something to do, a decision that could be made that may be very, very helpful. Now, how do we attach the use of these substances to making decisions? Well, we can see that when people do take cannabis in certain amounts, certainly DMT, Amanita muscaria, any of these substances, we tend to reshuffle information differently in our mind. There is some suggestion that we can even communicate with our DNA and all the knowledge there. Maybe we do go to another universe, if you will. In any event, these substances allowed us to get different information that wasn't available locally, and to solve problems and to survive. Obviously, we've survived, we're here. And it's not simply people sitting down in a group and making decisions. They used substances, meditation, if you will, illness, dream, to have prophecy, if you will, that would help them survive. And that's how I see these substances being very, very important, and they've been neglected. Even today, we hear the anecdotal stories of, say, Watson and Crick and so on, and Crick using LSD to find out the configuration of the DNA molecule. I mean, he says this in one of his books. Other researchers have used substances and have come up with new ideas that have affected millions of people. And so when people make decisions, when a shaman makes a decision or a priest makes a decision or goes to the other side and gets new information, comes back and gives that to the king, which he then acts on, this information affects thousands and thousands and thousands of people. Keep in mind that decision making is made by the elite. It's not made by the common folk. And the elite go to the other side, or make decisions in small groups which affect many, many, many people. And so that's how I see these substances being used. And of course, this has gone on for thousands and thousands of years. So that's mainly the point of the book, of how these substances have been neglected in terms of how we got to this place in history.
Okay, great. Thank you. So I think let's everyone say thank you to John Rush. And